All right, well, come on, everyone. We're going to make some faces for the thumbnail, and then we will get started here with our first ever 15 and 60, I believe, on YouTube. We'll do about half the show here on YouTube. Rest, of course, will be available later on your podcast app. Although, I don't know. We'll see how it's going. The reason I usually don't like doing this on YouTube is it's very stats heavy. Sometimes we got to take a pause, like look stuff up. So we got to see just how this format works on YouTube. If it's going well, maybe we'll just continue to roll through and put the whole thing up here. But let me tweet us out very quickly, and then we can get rolling. Okay, let me give you something to think about here. The Milwaukee Bucks start.
The Cleveland Cavaliers start.
Let's see.
I have one. The Pacers having two backup centers with Achilles injuries.
Eesh. The way Nikola Jokic feels about the amount of help that he's getting so far this season. All right, let's do a podcast. Welcome on, everyone, to the Eastern Conference 15 and 60. If you're joining us here for the first time, well, what we try to do is talk about each of the 15 teams in the conference, give you a summary of where they're at statistically, and then we're going to break down whatever has stood out to us. Sometimes it'll be film research, sometimes it'll be a recent game where we really want to get into the weeds. Sometimes it'll be a statistical breakdown, can be a lot of stuff that we want to get to on the Eastern Conference. And it used to be called 15 and 60 because we tried to do it in 60 minutes. I don't know that Danny and I have ever successfully completed one in less than 90 minutes. So you probably end up being about 8 minutes or so per team. So let's get rolling here. We'll start at the top of the alphabet, but we're going to jump around because we have some teams that played each other here with the Atlanta Hawks, and I will do their stats. They are 3-4, a negative 2.0 net rating. They started 2-0 and have struggled since with a bunch of injuries. They are actually 9th on offense, which is, I think, is pretty decent. 116.4. The defense is supposed to be better this year. Au contraire, 26th in the NBA, 118.4. Their projection per ESPN's BPI is for the 9th seed still, 36 and 46.
Perpetual.
35% chance of making the playoffs. So want to get into a little bit of just what we've seen early from the number one overall pick, Zachary Reese-Shea.
Exactly. And this is not the full synergy breakdown that one or both of us will do later in the season. This is more just like a quick look at how Reese-Shea is doing. He was the number one overall pick. And I pulled these stats yesterday because not everything pulls perfectly when they played. They played Sunday, but actually Reese-Shea's overall game wasn't that different from the stat line. He had 11 points in their loss to their win over the Pels. They beat him by 14. So Reese-Shea is currently starting, but it does seem like Quinn Snyder's intention was to have DeAndre Hunter and Jalen Johnson start with Reese-Shea as the first forward off the bench. He was still playing a significant role, about 20 minutes a game. In the games before Hunter began sitting, he's been dealing with this knee issue, which is continuing from last year. And so what I was most interested in, you and I, of course, did a full draft scout on Reese-Shea when he was a prospect, was, well, how is his role so far, small sample size, with the Hawks compared to his role with Borg last year? And typically, most players, they have a big step down. They're going to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond because there are no bigger ponds than the NBA. And what I found interesting, because I went into this without I've watched a few Hawks games, was I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to find. I know the percentages have been worse, but I didn't know about the proportions. And honestly, they're about the same. Risache last year, he took about in all competitions took about 6 threes per 36 minutes, about 7 twos, about 4 free throws per 36 minutes, and broadly speaking, pretty close now. A little bit over 6 threes per 36, a little bit over 7 twos, and then a little bit under on free throws, still in the high threes, but just a little bit lower in the high threes. And that's pretty striking because you go from a team where I had remembered it incorrectly, where Risache, I thought he had a larger role, even if there were some inconsistent games where he disappeared. But he's mixed between starter and reserves here. But like his kind of the shots he's taking are very similar to the shots he was doing before.
Yeah, that's not a huge surprise to me. The idea that he would be featured offensively when he wasn't even for his team last year was unlikely. And it was interesting that one of the things that a lot of people pointed to was, oh, well, he's averaging very few assists. I thought he had showed some passing flashes that indicated that he could be better. I think he was like, 1.5 assists a game. That's on the European scale, of course, so they're hard to come by. The thing that I liked about him the most was that he was really effective attacking closeouts. That has not translated in the slightest. First of all, part of the problem is that he's not hitting any of his spot ups, and that has encompassed 37% of his offense, and then transition a further 26%. So he really just has not been able to be efficient so far, and when he drives to the basket, even he's only 3 of 12 driving to the basket off of closeouts, with a couple of turnovers as well. So that hasn't been that effective, and that's certainly an important thing to have when you're playing with Trae Young, because Trae Young is going to draw the defense. He's going to set you up in what should be an advantageous situation, and like he's been plenty aggressive shooting the 3. I hope that it's going to go in. I mean, that was one of the biggest variables, right? Like when we talked about him, how is this guy going to become, a really high level of player? The thing that I thought had the greatest chance of really popping was him becoming a really good shooter. Haven't seen signs of that. Obviously, it's very early. He at least hasn't been turning down shots, which is a good thing. And then he also has been pretty ineffective in transition as well. So we've seen almost none of him doing stuff on the ball whatsoever. 4 pick and roll ball handler possessions, 3 handoffs, couple of post ups, 2 isolations, like basically just kind of events of opportunity on those sorts of things. Nothing that they're actually trying to run for him.
Right. And just as a bit of context here, I brought Risache's his struggles from the field is shooting 40% on 2s and 22% on 3s so far. That's 27 3-point attempts and 30 2-point attempts. So we're still in extremely small sample size theater. So you don't want to draw too much on it. It's more kind of the stuff you were mentioning, kind of what's succeeding, what isn't working. And I think that his judgment when I've watched the Hawks hasn't been particularly bad, but the shots do need to actually go in both now and in the future. So something to watch. And then another thing that I liked about Risache, I found it interesting, was even though like at times I thought his defense was a little bit overhyped, he was a pretty solid defensive playmaker. Had most of his European years, he had a steal rate over 2 and a block rate over 2. That's largely carried over. So he was actually below a 2 steal rate until today. He had 3 today, so that might have pushed him over 2%, the vaunted 2 and 2%. And then he Risache 4% block rate, 6 total in his first 6 games of NBA action. So if that stuff can continue, I still think that his he's not a lockdown defender, but he can be a solid team defender. And that is a way that he can help the Hawks, whether he's a starter or a reserve, is just turning things over, getting some stops, and then ideally helping push the ball forward.
So one thing to keep an eye on here for the Hawks is that their 3-point defense has been execrable. They are allowing opponents to shoot 41% from 3. That's worse than the league. That won't continue, you hope, all season. And we've seen some teams in the high 30s to even 40%. But also they are allowing the the second most is a better way to say it, opponent 3-point attempts per game. 41.5 opponent 3-point attempts per game. They are getting more up recently than they had earlier on. Part of that maybe has been because Dyson Daniels is out and Garrison Matthews is playing a lot more. And Matthews, he's been absolutely on fire. He's saving their 3-point percentage because Trae Young, Jalen Johnson, Risa Shea, those guys are three of their higher volume guys on the perimeter, and none of them are hitting anything. But Garrison Matthews is taking 11.4 per 36, and he's made 51% of those. So that's I've always felt like he should be in a rotation somewhere, and he's taking on the role that Bogdan Bogdanovic took on, but he's out for at least a month now with this hamstring tendinopathy.
And good news for the Hawks, they got Dyson Daniels back in their win on Sunday over the Pels, and so that allowed them to have a little bit more normal rotation because they were without 2 starters. It didn't really have a ton to replace those guys. And in their game, in that win over the Pelicans, they got more threes from kind of surprising places. Larry Nance was 2 for 3. David Roddy, who got his rookie scale option declined, he was 2 of 2. So we'll see where that goes moving forward. But they got 15 to 36 in that 15-point win.
Let's move now to a matchup on Friday between two of the East's early surprise darlings, the Chicago Bulls and the Brooklyn Nets.
I'll start with the Bulls stats
first here.
Yeah. So the Bulls on the season, they are 3-3. They're doing so though with a negative 3.7 net rating, which is 20th in the league. That can happen in this small sample. They're 25th on offense and 10th on defense. The BPI projections have them finishing with the 8 seed, 39 wins, and a 57% chance of making the playoffs.
Yeah, so Chicago, we talked about their struggles in forcing turnovers. They had 2 20-point comebacks in a row, one against Memphis without John Morant, and then another one against the Magic when it turned out Paolo Banchero was playing with a torn oblique and Franz Wagner had an illness and barely played, but they won both of those. There was one hilarious moment in that Magic game where the Magic got a chance to tie with the shot clock off. The Bulls were up 4. Paolo and the Magic score a 2 to cut it to 2, and then they denied the ball in bounds 3 times in a row. They couldn't inbound the ball in the backcourt. They take a timeout and advance it. They get the ball denied inbound again, had to take their last time out, and then turn it over on the inbound. But in the end, Bulls won that one. And then this one against the Nets. Nets 120, Bulls 112. And the biggest thing that's encouraging for the Bulls right now is the number of threes that they're getting up. They got up 44 in this game. And really 2 men have driven most of that, which is Kobe White and Zach LaVine. Both those guys were 5 and 9 from downtown in this game. And even Ayo Dosunmu got up more, 2 out of 7. He's not really like a huge bomber. But then they also got 4 each from Giddey, who really struggled with 5 of 17. Nikola Vucevic, I'll talk more about his game. He had maybe his best game in a Bulls uniform in this one, offensively. And then Patrick Williams. But the way that they've been getting threes up, I think, has been really interesting. And with the departure of DeMar DeRozan, this is something to watch with the Kings too. Like we talked about how DeRozan kind of gives you an offensive floor, and that allowed them to get more defensive players on the floor. They now have a grand total of, 2 defensive players in their rotation at this point. But their offenses look better, and they are just making very quick decisions, right? It's very little of run everything through Vooch, where he tries to do a bunch of handoffs and then flows into a post-up, or very few static post-ups. If they do post him up, he's trying to duck in right at the charge circle. Then Kobe White is one of the fastest decision makers in the league. He is really catching the ball and either driving, moving it, or most often shooting a 3. And Patrick Williams, well, they just don't really throw in the ball, so it doesn't matter. He's a really slow decision maker. Josh Giddey, he'll be on the ball at the start of possessions, but usually he's making a pretty quick decision, or he'll kind of get the churn moving a little bit. And then they have like Jalen Smith to space out off the bench. So they've just done a really good job of getting off the ball quickly. And even though they don't have like dominating creators, they do have guys that you really need to respect out by the arc. And so the Bulls offense looked pretty decent in all these games, I would say, over the last week or so. Any particular players you're I guess I could talk about Vucevic here.
Yeah, I think you should. Because I'll mention this outright. I watched a different Nets game, which we'll talk about afterwards, and so I'm interested in the Bulls guys because I didn't see them in Vooch. Yeah, I mean the box score line on it's phenomenal. 10 of 11 from the field, 3 of 4 from 3. Actually got to the line 5 times, which for him is very strong. Some offensive rebounds, and so it was a double-double, 28 and 11, but also a steal, a block, and 3 assists.
Yeah, and really the way, like, he's kind of, other than getting to the foul line, although he did take 5, which is, he's had a couple of games where he's gotten fouled like multiple times, is like kind of playing the way that we would have liked to see him play. Now, it helps that he is just shooting with absolutely zero hesitation from 3 finally. And I think, again, that they aren't giving him nearly as much touch time. That actually might be something interesting to look up while I'm talking, is just like what his number of touches and like time of possession is. My guess would be it's way down, which you wouldn't think because they got rid of DeRozan. But that would be my guess. They're obviously trying to run a lot more at every opportunity. But what I really liked from Vucevic was the Nets are pretty small. They're starting Ben Simmons at center, and then they're going to Nick Claxton, who's a guy that Vucevic can kind of push around physically. So Vucevic goes right to the front of the rim on drives, got 3 offensive rebounds. He got a duck in, and then he got a 3 from the top of the key that he shot with no hesitation for his 5 of 5 in the third quarter. And then only 3 assists too. He just hasn't been being the guy making the play as often. And so for him to go 3 of 4 from 3 and not miss a 2-pointer, like, that's what I want to see from him, because he's always really struggled with his efficiency. So just reducing the number of shots that he's taking, using his big body to get good looks. He's had a number of pretty good games so far this season. What are his season stats? That might be another interesting thing to talk about for him too, because it seems like the good games are kind of adding up for him.
For Vooch?
Yeah.
21.5 points, 11 rebounds, 3.3 assists. So 21.5 points would be the most he scored in a season since his 2 All-Star years. Those are the only 2 other times he was over 20. And 11 rebounds. He's been around that level a fair amount.
Well, do you know what his true shooting percentage is? I would guess it wouldn't shock me if this is the highest true shooting percentage, certainly of any 6 games that Nikola Vucevic has played as a Bull. 67%.
Oof.
True shooting. And of course, he's never turning it over because he's not doing as much on the ball either. And, some of that is his 3-point shooting, obviously. He's shooting 50% from downtown, but from 2, he's also been excellent, 58%. A few other Bulls things. I noted that they just don't have much in the way of defensive players. Like Dosunmu is that coming off the bench. They did get Jalen Smith back in this game. I don't think he really qualifies. He'll block a few shots, but he's not very physical. They actually had him doing a little bit more switching defensively, and then I guess Patrick Williams, who would be the other one. He's sort of like, I've been watching a little bit of fantasy in my rare down moments. And so I thought Patrick Williams, he kind of reminded me of some sort of like a creature that lives under a bridge, where as long as you just walk across the bridge quietly and don't engage with him, you're just never going to be bothered. But if you throw the ball to Patrick Williams or try to score on Patrick Williams with his man, then he activates. But other than in those 2 circumstances, he just does nothing. So that was definitely the way I felt about him in this game.
He's very, very nearsighted.
Yeah.
Oh, I have the Vooch possession stats, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay. So last year, Vucevic, this is per game, 46.9 front court touches and a time of possession of 1.5. This year, that drops to 45.5 touches, which is less, but not dramatically less. But time possession from 1.5 to 1.3. So it is a little bit less. It's not a lot less, but it is a little.
Yeah, I wonder, is he playing more minutes this year? All right, well, I guess what I saw in this game, sometimes it's good to check the stats because your eyes could deceive you. But certainly in terms of the shots that he took, I felt like there were better shots than he normally is taking. That's pretty inarguable. But back to Patrick Williams, there's one play that I thought kind of summed up the Patrick Williams experience, where Nets get a stop. Nick Claxton is out on the floor. He's running the floor, and Patrick Williams is back. He's like the lone quote-unquote big who's back. But no problem. It's a 3-on-3. And so Patrick Williams doesn't even see Nick Claxton, doesn't understand that there's nobody to guard Nick Claxton, and then just runs to the corner to guard a guy who's already covered, and the Nets just throw an alley-oop to Nick Claxton in transition. Like, that's just like the perfect Patrick Williams experience, just the utter lack of feel that he possesses. The other thing that I thought, they were kind of struggling with the closing lineup. I think they should have just gone with P. Will and gone with Dosunmu, who just to guard the Nets a little bit better. They had Giddey out there, and so what the Nets did, which I thought was really good, was they had Cam Thomas run a pick and roll to get Giddey on him, and then they went at basically a 1-4-5 style pick and roll, and then when Giddey is on Cam Thomas, then he runs the pick and roll with Claxton involving Vucevic in the action, and they got 2 very good looks out of that, and then Cam Thomas hit this 3 from the logo late in the clock that basically put the Nets up 3 possessions late and iced things. Let me see if there's any other kind of Chicago notes that I had on this one before we transition to the Nets. Dalen Terry is kind of like, his defense has actually improved a little bit. He had a couple of nice physical drives. It's easy to run. This is his 3rd year. It's something that will come up later when we talk about Alex Sarr, of just how much stronger guys get in like their core and dealing with physicality, even like guys who aren't that good. And so it's just like, yeah, this guy is actually like, looks more like a man out there. They go with Modest Buzelis is down in the G League. They went with Horton Tucker for a little bit. He only played, I think, in the first half. And Terry actually got 14 minutes. You'd think he'd be in competition with Horton Tucker. I think Terry could be a decent defensive player. Doesn't shoot it at all. Julian Phillips is another guy. Like, their bench kind of has this underbelly. Like, these guys are out there and like they don't look like they're killing you, but we may look up in a month and it's like Dalen Terry and Julian Phillips have made like 10 threes between them over the first month of the season. So that's something to keep an eye on. Dosunmu shot it much better last year. Didn't love the way the 3-pointers were looking coming off his hands in this 2 for 7 performance, a few that were wide open. So let's transition to Brooklyn now.
We can, and I'll start with their stats. The Nets are 3-4 on the season, still much better than we expected. They actually have a positive net rating, 0.1, which is 13th in the league, 10th on offense, 19th on defense, and BPI projects them to finish with 34 wins, which would be 12th in the East, and a 21% chance, which is way better than we would put it, of making the playoffs. One thing, and this was a factor, we're dealing with small sample size here. I think it was a factor in both the game you watched and the game I watched, is that the Nets are giving up the highest opponent free throw attempt rate in the entire NBA. Median in the league right now is about 20.5 per 100 field goal attempts. They're giving up 33.5 free throw attempts per 100 field goal attempts. So that's a lot.
Yeah, and that can happen sometimes too when you have a deep team that guys come in there and they're going to try to play with a lot of energy. I think that's generally a good thing, but guys also know that they're not going to play that much, so they're not that worried about fouling.
Well, and another reason this can happen is that the Nets are very thin in the front court because Claxton's making his way back from injury in both the game against the Bulls and the game against the Pistons. He came off the bench, and to me, the Nets defense looked a lot better when he was on the floor. Like they're just more cohesive. And so when you're playing, if you want to call it Ben Simmons at center, because they don't have Dayrod Sharp, he's hurt as well. So that can sometimes lead to foul trouble too. Sometimes it leads to teams being so far away that they're not fouling, but other times it can bump that up because you're just like, you're trying to help out and you just can't do it well.
So the Nets, they obviously took a big step back in this Detroit game. They had another nice offensive game in this one, and Cam Thomas, particularly against a team that doesn't have great perimeter defenders, I think he can just be pretty effective. He was, he's never going to be a guy who's going to shoot, 15 to 23 from the field. So he's 11 to 23, but 4 of 11 from 3, 6 of 7 from the foul line. Even had 4 assists in this one as well, and 32 points in 32 minutes. So that was really And he was a guy who at least has gotten to the point where if you don't have someone who's good guarding him, like he's going to be a problem. Now, again, this is another guy where his good games make it on SportsCenter or whatever, or YouTube or whatever you're getting your highlights from these days. But then the games where he really struggles, like I think he was bad in the Detroit game, you kind of just, they don't show up on the radar screen. And then you look at the stats and it's like, yeah, he has some incandescent games. He also has some where he really struggles. But I thought he was pretty solid in this game, getting to the basket, taking advantage of the Bulls' lack of rim protection and lack of stellar perimeter defenders. And he's able to get his shot off. You need someone who has pretty good length on him, or I think a lot of it is like he's going to create his looks regardless, but when he's feeling like he just knows the move he can go to get a shot off against his defender, he's going to be a lot more effective than if it's a guy with length who's going to kind of bother them. Now, I'll ask you this, Danny. Did you think that at any point this season I would be describing the Brooklyn Nets as a deep team?
No, I didn't. And they do still, I mean, they will shed quality over the course of this year in all likelihood, considering they got their own pick. And as we've mentioned,
and they don't really have any injuries other than Sharp right now either.
True. And so, but yeah, I mean, it is striking because they have players in the rotation who were cast offs for the team. I mean, Zaire Williams is playing pretty consistently for them. And then, I mean, Keon Johnson played minutes in both games. He was
good in this one.
Yeah, he
had a run of 10 points in a row in the second quarter.
He was a little bit less good, though. He was far from the problem in the Nets' loss to the Pistons. But yeah, they have a lot of like competent players overall. I want to talk about that concept a little bit more, actually, in the context of the Detroit Pistons. But for the Nets, one thing that was a commonality between both, but the win over the Bulls and the loss of Pistons is that they haven't really shot the three. I mean, they were 11-36. So that's a little over 30% against the Bulls, and then a little under 30%, 9 of 31. And in the second,
and that attempt rate has really gone down these last couple of games, which I think is something to watch. Like they've been running a lot. They have guys who will shoot the three, and then a few guys even who will just like gun it off a handoff. But again, they don't have, their passing is very limited. So like, who is the guy who's drawing the defense in and creating threes for his team? It's like they're kind of getting it out of actions. They're getting it out of just like, all right, I just handed off to this guy in a 21 action on the right side, and like his defender has kind of fell asleep, so I'll just shoot it. Like those are the kinds of plays that are generating threes for them. And I think now that defenses have started to button up on that a little bit, and so you see it's got to kind of be more Cam Thomas creating those for himself.
Or in the game I watched, Cam Johnson firing away, which he did. Cam Johnson actually had a huge first half. He had 22 points in the first half and was a big part of why the Nets were ahead by a little bit. I still thought the Pistons played better than the Nets did in that first half. And then the offensive wheels came off the wagon for Brooklyn. I think it was a mixture of Detroit playing well, competing on defense, and the Nets just missing everything. There was at one point the Nets were, I think, 1 of 11 on threes, and then somebody made one right at the end to go to whopping 2 of 12 on threes in the second half. And as we were talking about, the quality of shots they're generating, and like so in this one, Dorian Finney-Smith was 1 of 4 from 3. He took a couple that were like more in the flow, maybe a little bit of Dallas-y, but generally speaking, those Luka Doncic is in here. You're not getting those kinds of shots on this team.
Yeah, so, I think that's a perfect encapsulation, actually, where Dorian Finney-Smith is generally not going to shoot unless he's wide open. Where Cam Johnson might shoot a little bit more, Cam Thomas might shoot a little bit more in those circumstances. So
yeah, and so they're just not generating those shots overall.
Yeah, well, so let me talk a little bit more about this game. We can shift to the Detroit game because I do want to hear more about that. So in this one, yeah, they didn't play anyone more than Schroeder's 33 minutes. He had a really hot start to the year. He's kind of cooled off. The Bulls did a very good job. Billy Donovan would know this because he coached him at OKC, of basically forcing everything to his left hand. Even Josh Giddey was able to deal with him reasonably well in isolations to not give up just that hard right-handed drive. And Schroeder only got up 3 threes. He's been shooting well from 3 and on a high volume early on. Zaire Williams looks to be back athletically, I would say, where he was that first season. He's coming off the bench, played 20 minutes, and there still looks like there might be a player in here a little bit. He just can get up for some alley-oops. He had a couple of beautiful cuts right behind Giddey for layups or dunks, and like gets into the ball a little bit defensively. Like they're definitely like seeing him out there as an athlete, like even if he's just a total non-shooter, which I don't think he is. We'll see where he's at again. That's what I'm gonna say for a lot of these guys. It's like, all right, where is a Jalen Wilson who's impressed to start this season, just in terms of like his activity level and ability to shoot the three? You know, where is he gonna be as an offensive player? Where's Noah Clowney gonna be shooting the ball? Like he's impressed me a lot with his defense around the rim in this game. I thought he was really good there, and he's playing the 4 exclusively. I think he actually protects the rim enough to be a 5 more in small ball groups. He's another guy who just is like, all right, now he looks like he's actually not just getting thrown around like a rag doll out there. And then Ben Simmons was actually, this was a pretty good Ben Simmons game. He had 11 assists, and very few of those are from actually drawing the defense. Like he does this hilarious thing where he brings the ball up, and he's being guarded by Nikola Vucevic this whole time too. Like you would think that Ben Simmons could just like, with a spread floor, like go at Nikola Vucevic and go past him and score or finish at the basket. He's not trying to do that. So he kind of does this hilarious thing where he's breaking the absolute minimum slice of the paint that you can at the absolute maximum angle going away from the basket. And then he'll kind of like bring it up and hope to just attract an eye enough to like spring a guy on a back door or set up a 3. And Simmons is still probably the one guy as a passer on this team who can help set up threes. I mean, that would be something interesting to look at, is like how many threes are they taking when Simmons is on the floor versus off. He does give them some impetus and transition. So he had 11 assists, and he's not drawing the defense, but he's a good enough passer anyway that he still really finds plays. I thought he had one of his better defensive games as like an actual center in this one. Like they are using him as a center. They even in his previous Nets days, they would kind of use him more as an on-ball stopper. Like he actually blocked a couple of shots around the rim. He doesn't have a big wingspan. It wasn't like, great verticality or anything, but like a couple times guys tried to go at him and he stopped them. So that the experiment of him at center versus Claxton coming back from the hamstring, I think once they hit a little bit of a losing skid, Claxton will be back in the starting lineup. But and I think they're also just trying to get what they can out of Simmons, and by starting him, given his mental frailty, that's probably the best thing.
You saw a better Ben Simmons game than I did. And I thought that one of the frustrations that I really had with Simmons there, and I looked into it a little bit statistically, is that he is probably the number 3 player on this team, or maybe even further than that I would like the ball in their hands. And when he starts, he kind of has to have the ball, because when Ben Simmons is not involved in the primary action.
So in this game that you watch, like to me, the only time he would touch the ball would be he'd bring it up, try to like slice sideways and like hand off to someone, or throw the ball to someone for a 3, and then he did a few more little like kind of, he'd get the ball at the elbow and try to make a pass on a set play. Like that was pretty much all they were giving him the ball that I saw, and then he would just be out of the way.
It wasn't dramatically different in the Pistons game, but I thought it got Schroeder and Thomas out of rhythm. Just they didn't quite get, and part of that was I thought that the Pistons defended the general kind of 3-headed monster pretty well. And when you consider that they're starting Tim Hardaway Jr. and Tobias Harris, that is pretty impressive. But I just thought and it's funny when you look at it statistically, this is completely true. So when, again, small sample size theater, when Schroeder's on the floor without Ben Simmons, in 310 clean the glass possessions, the Nets have a 129 offensive rating. And when those guys play together, they have a 106. And because Schroeder, it just kind of has to be, he's a little bit more passive. It's also an easy place for the help to come from. And I also thought that there was a stretch. It was late in the second quarter, I believe it was, might've been the third, where Duran had 2 blocks in a sequence. And as I remember it, part of that was just not really caring what Ben Simmons was up to. And so you could, if he's playing center and he's being defended by the center, then you can get those opportunistic things. And as you and I both believe, Jalen Duren is not necessarily the most astute, aware defender, but it's pretty easy to do those things when Ben Simmons is your cover.
Yeah, Simmons was -3 in this one. They lost by 14, only scored 35 points in the second half. It was
brutal.
Yeah, and Nick Claxton was 4 of 12 from the foul line. That's that is also
harkening back to that playoff elimination game. Couple
yeah,
years back.
yeah, when he was 0 for 11 in Game 4 of 2022 against the Celtics. Any other Nets notes before we shift to the Detroit way?
I mentioned it briefly, but Cam Johnson was a monster in the first half. 22 points and he showed more of his in between game, and so he actually had a play. I put it in my notes with an exclamation point and a question mark, where he drew the defense a little bit, and then made a nice interior pass, and I'm like, look at that. Like Cam Johnson's never really kind of had that in between game in my eyes. There were times last year where he tried it and I just never really thought it was there. And again, this isn't, put the ball in his hands, make him a secondary creator. No, but part of going back to the old 2 dribbles and a good decision thing is just make a good decision, ideally make a quick decision. And so I saw a little bit more of that from Johnson than I had previously, which is always
well. Cam Johnson, I mean, isn't Detroit the reason that he got paid in restricted free agency? That they were rumored to have an offer sheet and the Nets then just stepped up and paid him?
I believe you are correct. And the kind of the connection of, and then for the Nets, I mean, a big part of it, that second half you brought up that they scored 35, was that they couldn't hit a 3. And the 2-pointers kind of stopped falling too. And that ties in with, to me, one of the significant takeaways of this game from Detroit's perspective. You talked about the Nets depth, but paralleling what we saw from the Rockets a little while back, it is transformational, even though I don't love all of the NBA players that the Pistons are playing, that they have this many. So here were the guys who played at all in this game for the Pistons. They started Ivy, Cunningham, Hardaway Jr., Harris, and Duren, all NBA players, even if we're not the biggest fans of all of them in that role. Then Fontecchio, Malik Beasley, who was firing from 3 again, Ron Holland, and Isaiah Stewart. It's like, okay, like you're not playing those just like, I was thinking back, I brought up the Rockets.
I mean, Holland might be one of those guys, right?
But he only played 10 minutes. Like he was.
Yeah, he's in a small enough role.
He's in a small enough role. And Asar Thompson is still dealing with his blood clots. He's not playing at all. So like they didn't play Sasser in this one. They didn't play Paul Reed in this one. So like they have guys, like they have players, and I give credit to JB Bickerstaff that he's actually just like playing his centers at center, even though I think Paul Reed can play. Just like Isaiah Stewart, I think he does the best at the 5.
Just like not playing Isaiah Stewart at the 4 and not playing Killian Hayes. I mean, how many wins is that worth over last year?
A bunch. And so I thought that for the Pistons, that was a part of the story for them. And then their bench players, except for Ron Holland, the ones who played real minutes, the Pistons outscored the Nets during those minutes. And some of that was the threes not falling and everything else. But also like Simone Fontecchio, solid pro, did good things when he was out there, had a bunch of rebounds, was taking the right shots, even if they didn't go in this specific contest. And so that helped. And then the other thing that was encouraging, his overall box score line wasn't great, but Jaden Ivey, to me, showed a little bit more of the secondary playmaking that intrigued when he was at Purdue. And so we didn't see him like run a ton of pick and roll, but it was like, you get him downhill and something good can happen. He had a nice lob to Duren, which Duren didn't dunk on the pass. He ended up having to corral it and then do it. I thought the pass was good enough. It just didn't happen. And then he had a nice dump off on a drive. So he was driving, drew the defender, and then dumped it off to Malik Beasley for an easy layup. And so like those sorts of things. And so that's, Jaden Ivey, you're looking for those sorts of plays. Now the individual creation, like doesn't have an advantage stuff. I'm still not thrilled about that. I'm still not thrilled about his catch and shoot 3. He was 1 of 7 from long range overall, mix of catch and shoot and self-created. But part of the sales pitch for Ivy has always been the secondary creation stuff. And I thought that was left a little bit wanting the first couple of years, but maybe moving along a little bit.
Yeah, and they've moved him to a backup point guard, and this is really the first time they've played him in that primary role without Cade, and I think that has helped him a little bit. And when it's the choice between either he or Marcus Sasser, you're a little bit better there. At least now you have more size defensively as well. You're not playing another small guy next to Jaden Ivey. So this was your Ivy unit, for example, in the third quarter. It was Ivy, Beasley, Fontecchio, Stewart, Ron Holland. That's like at least a group that has some real shooting. Now, I mean that's also like really putting the ball in Ivy's hands. There isn't like a Kelly Olynyk type of big to bail him out and run everything through in that group. And it's basically just a full stagger between Ivy and Cunningham. They're not even necessarily putting Tobias Harris out there as a security blanket for him. Not that the Tobias Harris security blanket is a bit threadbare
Well,
at this point.
He had a better game against the Nets, but it was still not fantastic.
What else did you have from this one? Duran showed some flashes defensively.
Yeah, I mean, he had 3 blocks, 2 of which were on back-to-back possessions. I thought that looked fine, but I still don't believe in his like reactions or anything like that. He can grab a rebound if it's there. He did that, had 14 defensive, 3 offensive. So I thought he was fine. Like, this was far from the worst game that I've seen from him. And then I continue to be, even though Hardaway Jr. had a decent statistical game, I kind of keep on wondering why Malik Beasley is coming off the bench and Hardaway's starting, even though hilariously,
Hardaway is better on defense.
But I cracked up, and
I think, Hardaway. He's like a Michigan guy. He's like more of a vet than Beasley.
They treated him as more of an asset in the trade than they probably should have. There's some of that kind of stuff. But I cracked up because I thought Beasley played better than Hardaway did on Sunday, and he played more. He ended up kind of having some moments late, and so I thought that was good. And like Beasley's willingness to fire, I thought that also makes life easier in the Ivy minutes, in the Ivy centric minutes. And so you have him and Fontecchio and Holland and Stewart. That's pretty solid positional size for a backup unit. And it's also enough credible shooting to make life a little easier on Holland and Ivy. And so, I thought that was all striking. This was not the most dominant Cade Cunningham performance, but he did get some big buckets, some big times. He had a sequence where he had an and one that was pretty nice. And then he had a 3-pointer. And so when the Pistons kind of needed a little bit of jolt, then he was a part of the run they had in the second half. Like, he did fine, but I've wanted to see, like, when you see that the Pistons won this game going away against the Nets, one of my big hopes would be, Cade Cunningham was clearly the best guy on the floor. The Nets didn't have anyone who could handle him. That wasn't really the story of this game. I thought he played fine, but he wasn't overtly dominant.
Yeah, he's turning it over just an absolute shitload.
Seven times on Sunday, and then I think it was how many? I think it was a few in the game before that too.
His overall turnover percentage is 18%. We don't quite have our custom stats ready quite yet this early in the season, but we'll take a look at what those say. And I think that's probably about it then on.
Oh, do you want to do their stats?
Oh yeah, sorry, I thought we did already.
No, we didn't do the Pistons. We did the other.
They are now 2-5. Should be better. They should be better because they are going to be an East playing team. I predicted it on Thursday. It's going to happen. Negative 5.3 net ratings, 23rd, 22nd on offense, 17th on defense. That's where I think they actually can make a little bit of hay. They haven't had the toughest schedule, and when the two teams they beat are Philly and the Nets, but this Nets offense is going pretty good. They held them to 92. That's not bad. They project still. Actually, this is interesting that BPI thinks that 29 and 53 will be the 14th seed in the Eastern Conference. If I can make a bet with BPI on that, I will gladly do so. I don't know if I can. 2% chance of making the playoffs. Let's get to the Celtics here. We've talked a lot about them. This will probably be a little bit sparser of a section. 6-1. They did lose that game in Indiana, that crazy wild game on Wednesday where they came back from down 20 in the fourth, but then ended up losing anyway. Jason Tatum hit a ridiculous step back to tie it, to cement their comeback into overtime, but then Pascal Siakam hit a huge tie-breaking 3 in the last 20 seconds to win it. But they are at a 15.6 net rating. That is actually only 3rd in the NBA, but their offense continues to be an absolute assault. 128 offensive rating, picking up basically right where they left off. Remember when all the offense was down after the break last year, theirs was up. They were in the high 120s last year as an offense, and that has continued. We'll talk about their crazy 3-point volume a little bit here, I'm sure. 12th on defense, and I don't, they haven't played that many great offenses yet, other than the Knicks. The Knicks, they slowed down pretty well. The Knicks scored a lot in garbage time in that game. And Charlotte actually has been a pretty decent offense as well, as we'll talk about momentarily. But I don't know that they're going to be a top 5 defense this year. Maybe when Porzingis comes back, they'll ramp it up a little bit. Also, like they kind of don't need to be. I mean, they're going to be playing kind of more slow centers. I think they generally, Al Horford, like to really be peak Celtics, they got to have Al Horford out there. They also just don't have great rim protection. Actually, I'll look that up of what they're allowing at the rim. I think it was pretty bad when I last looked at it, but they project for a 59 win pace and the 1 seed per ESPN's BPI.
To me, one of the jaw-dropping stats with the Celtics so far is that they are taking 50.3 3-pointers per game. Per game. That's incredible. And they're making...
Yeah, I mean, that would be an NBA record by quite a bit. I think the record is like 43 or 44. Like those Jazz teams 2-3 years ago, some of the Harden Rockets teams were in that range. But yeah, this would be well beyond that.
It's just to let people know. So they're at 50.3. Hornets are second at 44.3. Then the Bulls at 44.2. The Warriors at 42.8. That's kind of where things are. So they're well above even the like the high teams there. And we'll see where these things go. Something that I wanted to keep an eye on with the Celtics was kind of how they would do their player usage, even with Porzingis out. And as I think we both expected, the Celtics are resting Al Horford on one side of back-to-backs the whole year. And that started, they sat him in the Friday game. They had a back-to-back against the Hornets. They sat him on Friday rather than on Saturday. And how Joe Mazzulla handled it was they started Luke Cornett, and then they had Neemias Queta as the big off bench. They each played 24 minutes. Tillman had a DNP CD. I don't know exactly what's going on there. And the split was not really due to garbage time because in the Friday game, Boston only led by 6 starting the 4th, and it didn't get to double digits until about 4 minutes left. That was the weird game where Grant Williams got ejected for getting a flagrant 2 on Jason Tatum. It was a very weird play. And then in game 2...
Yeah, Grant Williams said like it was an accident. He was like kind of going for the ball. He loves these guys. Jaylen Brown had his typically inflammatory rhetoric going back at Grant Williams. Yeah.
And then so to follow up with the player usage, we didn't get the kind of the counterpoint as what we maybe expected because Jaylen Brown missed the second game due to left hip flexor strain. He's described as day-to-day, but he's also missing Monday against the Hawks. So he'll day-to-day, but...
Yeah, it's hard to tell on these with Boston at first because they're going to be extremely conservative as they were last year, and they also just have faith that they can beat a Hornets team.
Mm-hmm. And so just briefly back to player usage. So what Mazzulla did was they played Horford and Cornett. They started Horford at the 4 and then Tatum down at the 3, and they beat the Hornets the second time. And so that was all fine.
To answer my own question, they are allowing 68.5% shooting at the rim. That's 21st in the league. Let's actually take this last one here. A question from Red Fork Lawyer, big fan of the program. Seen him a lot in our various fora, but yeah, good legal term there, huh? Red Fork Lawyer, like that one. So he says, indulge me, guys. 2 minutes. Assume full health. Who wins Boston OKC finals? All right, let's do it. Well, let's put 2 minutes on the timer and just discuss Boston versus OKC. We obviously allow ourselves the chance to amend this. This is off the top of our heads, and go.
I think it'd be a very fun series. Joe Mazzulla and Mark Daigneault are coaches that we think pretty highly of. I think that Boston has the talent advantage. I think that they can the wings that they have will be hard for OKC to counter.
Yeah, I think it would actually be a defensive series, despite the fact that Boston is this amazing offense. I think I don't think that Boston, OKC is the one team, because we always talk about it, all right, no matter who you put out there, Boston's going to have some kind of an advantage. You'll have to put some shitty guy on Derek White, and then he'll run a pick and roll with Tatum, and you're screwed there. Drew Holiday can get in the post, or you're just not going to have the length to close out on Drew Holiday. Well, that's not going to be the case with OKC. And then I also think that the way that Boston wants to play defense, which is lots of switching, like they're going to just trust whoever to stay in front of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And if there's any kind of, if OKC doesn't have perfect spacing like they did in the Dallas series, just in terms of where they're standing and stuff, that could be an issue. So I actually think that would be a defensive series. I think I would take Boston just because I think Boston at their absolute apex. I think that it would also matter if Porzingis were available as well. I think
we're assuming full health, so we are.
Yeah, full health. Okay, yeah. I mean, we'll see. But like full health for Porzingis, he's coming back from this injury. Like how effective he's going to be. I mean, we'll assume he plays the same way he did last year. But yeah, I think that level of spacing that he could provide, like really going deep and shooting over guys, could be a possible game breaker in that series. But I think Boston can get their defense with their best groups close to OKC. I think their offense just overall is a little bit better. But I mean, I hope we see that series. I think it would be wonderful. So I would go with the Boston Celtics in 7, but also OKC could reinforce before then too.
I'll go Celtics in 6, but it's close. I mean, I have a lot of love for both of those teams picked. Hey, look at that!
Good 2 minutes. That's the first time in Dunc'd On history we've actually kept to a time limit. Okay. Let's move on to our next team here, and that is the aforementioned Charlotte Hornets. So why don't you give us their stats, please, Danny?
The Hornets are 2-4. They have a negative 4.5 net rating, which is 21st in the league. 7th on offense, 29th on defense. I mentioned that they are getting up an absolute ton of threes. BPI projects them to win 35 games, which would be 11th just out of the play-in, and gives them a 24% chance of making the playoffs. Brandon Miller's back. He played 31 minutes in the second Hornets-Celtics game. So good to see him back from that glute issue. And then on top of Mark Williams' injury, Nick Richards left the first of the Boston games with right shoulder soreness and missed the second one. And that was also the game where Grant Williams got tossed. And then in the Saturday game, Grant Williams started, and then Moussa Diabate was the primary backup. Taj Gibson played a bit too. So it's remarkable how many bigs they've been missing. And another kind of surprising part of that story is that the Hornets have actually been a very successful offensive rebounding team. They were number 1 in the league in offensive rebounding early in the week. They've dropped to number 3. But when you consider that they're basically without most of their centers, that's extremely impressive.
Yeah, and some of these offensive rebound rates individually are pretty interesting, right? Like you've got, Richards has always been a bear on the offensive glass, but Diabate is at 20% offensive rebound. Vasilije Micic, who's kind of getting phased out of the rotation, actually, he's only played 3 games. I don't think he's hurt either, but he was actually got some offensive rebounds. Cody Martin, 6. Like you kind of have like Trey Mann, 4.5. You clearly have these perimeter players empowered to go and get the ball if no one is in front of them. Now, has that helped their transition defense? And they've played some absolutely wild games. Certainly, they did beat Toronto for one of their 2 wins. And I thought that was kind of interesting. That was a game in which Toronto was, as they've continued to be, it was very, very limited in terms of personnel. But they actually put Grant Williams on RJ Barrett. And we've also seen Grant Williams in their other win guard Alperen Sengun successfully. So he's probably a better post defender than a perimeter defender, but this is without Brandon Miller. And yeah, they just don't have a lot. Like the fact that you were going to say, no, we're going to go with Grant Williams here instead of Miles Bridges just shows you where Miles Bridges' individual defense is at, guarding like an RJ Barrett. You would hope that they could stay solid a little bit more with that group. And yeah, they also go Grant Williams at center down the end. And I thought that LaMelo was pretty good at the end of this one. He had a nice play where he blew right by Jamal Shead, who's been a nice little story as a defender, which is what he's supposed to be coming out of college for the Raptors. And then he also beat Jakob Poeltl right at the rim for a layup to ice it to go up 5 with 30 seconds left. And I thought it was good to see from him that at least on the offensive end, like Toronto is trying to double team him at the point of attack. He comes off the pick and roll and he just continues to try to dribble, blows right by Poeltl and Shed, and gets all the way to the basket and scores. So that was The play's coming back to my mind now as I talk about it. I took these notes a couple days ago, but it was good to see that he wasn't just like, oh, I'm double teaming, I'm going to like back up or something like that. Like, no, he actually like went hard, got around him and got to the basket. And LaMelo has, of course, been the big story of the early season. We'll break it down in greater detail.
Well,
but I think it's just worth talking about where he's at statistically.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. Through 6 games, LaMelo Ball is averaging 30 points a game, 30.2 to be specific, 6.3 assists, which would actually be his lowest assist rate since his rookie year, but still plenty. And then a steal and a half. And you're wondering, well, how is he getting those points? He is firing from 13 threes per 36 minutes, making over 40% of them. And it's been an improvement for LaMelo going back to a kind of last year, is that he's over 50% from 2. Last year he was at 50. This year he's at 56 so far, though small sample size caveats apply. They've only played about 200 minutes.
Yeah, and he's been getting to the rim more. He's not taking really any shots outside of 10 feet. He has been shooting the floater pretty well. A lot of those are difficult shots, kind of Euro stepping in the lane. And one of the things that was big about him as a prospect was he kind of, shot. You remember that crazy floater that he shot in Australia from like 17 feet? So he's not taking that from 17 feet, but he's almost taking it from 3 at times. Like we're seeing him, like I'll see Joel Embiid do this every once in a while, but he's kind of doing it more as a spot up unnecessarily. Like LaMelo, he has such a smooth game that rather than just like, stopping on a dime and shooting, he's just like, I'm going left or right. I'll just kind of keep shooting it as I'm going this way. And like, maybe he'll even lift 1 foot off the ground as he's doing that. Or he's just kind of ready to shoot, gets it off quickly, has a pretty high release. But he's going to fire it from anywhere. And he's just used to obviously playing that way, going back to his high school days, but he's making it. I mean, he just is looking like he's a really good shooter. I don't think he'll be at 40% all season. If he is at 40% on 13 per 36, which I think would be an NBA record on any type of real minutes in a season. I think maybe Steph was there, in like 21 or like maybe 21. But that is just a crazy volume. I did think it's interesting though that despite this great performance by LaMelo, and I mean he basically has like been their only good offensive player early on. I thought these comments by Charles Lee were pretty interesting because LaMelo is constantly in foul trouble. He fouled out of both Boston games.
Agreed. I mean, so the start of the quote. So we have to continue to challenge him, and we have to learn about, can he guard 1-on-1, or do we need to send a double team every time, or are you going to foul? So as a staff, we need to figure out what we are comfortable living with, but also through conversations with him, can he just sit down and guard his yard and commit to showing his hands and defend without fouling?
Yeah, and I thought this was remarkable too. Lee referred to his fouls as non-competitive. And this quote, I can live with a Peyton Pritchard end of shot clock fadeaway or a Jason Tatum step back. It's the ones where it's just blow-bys. To me, they're just non-competitive fouls where you are just giving up on the play by just fouling the guy. I like him challenging LaMelo like that because certainly, like LaMelo, for him, it's just been about reestablishing his career and being a high-level offensive player. But if they're really going to go somewhere, LaMelo is going to need to be a serious player in addition to having serious three-point shooting ability.
Agree wholeheartedly. Briefly, another high prolific Hornets guard, Trey Mann's coming off the bench but playing 28 minutes a game, averaging 19 points per game. And how's he doing it? First of all, it's volume. I mean, he's taken a ton of shots when he's on the floor, but making 44% about 8 threes per 36 is pretty impressive for Mann. And I mentioned it's on volume because he's actually only at 59% true shooting. And so to get to 19 points per game on coming off the bench, you're taking a lot of shots. So we'll keep an eye on it. Mann didn't get an extension. Where he kind of fits in on a good team is an open question. But you mentioned how the Lee's kind of figuring out the bench rotation. And in the second Celtics game, it was no Micic. It was Cody Martin, because Caleb is, of course, in Philly. Mann, Salon, Diabate, and Nick Smith Jr. rather than Micic.
Miles Bridges having a miserable start to the season, 25% from 3. And this is the thing that I consider to be there are a number of things I find very concerning. 3 dunks on the season. We thought, oh, maybe he'll get back with LaMelo and that'll open up that great alley-oop game that they had back in 22. No, not at all. 3 dunks on the season, shooting under 50% from 2. Oof. And only 64% at the rim. And then he's taking a bunch of floaters, which he shot a lot of last year. He's only at 33% on those. We'll see where those comes from. But everything that we've seen from him, and I've talked about this kind of in the context of guys like Andre Drummond, for example, kind of DeAndre Ayton bigs that, didn't have the greatest commitment, didn't take the best care of their bodies. And so they peaked from an athletic standpoint very, very early. And I think it's the same with Bridges. Bridges, of course, didn't play for a full season and has had a lot of drama, but like he just is nowhere near the same athlete. Like you don't see him on like those nightly highlights where he's just like yoking the ball back with his right hand and just dunking all over people. Like he's just like maybe if he gets into better shape as the season goes on, he can look better. But that's looking like a horrendous deal right now for Charlotte, paying him $25 million.
Not fantastic.
Let's start with the Cavs here now, and we can transition into the Bucks. We won't talk about their full game, but I did think that the end of their game on Friday was fascinating. Donovan Mitchell hit a big shot to win it with 0.3 remaining after Dame hit his own difficult step back against Isaac Okoro. But the Cavs break them up 7-0. Second in the NBA net rating, 16.3. They are third on offense and fourth on defense. They project for the 2 seed with 56 wins. And they do have a couple of injury issues with Jalen Tyson, left hip tightness. Now it's a left hip sprain, which I've never even heard that designation before. He wasn't in the rotation anyway, it seemed like. And just statistically, anything that jumps off the board for you about their initial jag here?
Yes. The Cleveland Cavaliers are, you mentioned they're number 3 in offense. They are number 1 in offensive effective field goal percentage. 60.5 is fantastic there. They are making the second highest percentage of threes in the league, 40.3%, even with Max Strus not playing a single minute so far this year. Strong 70% around the basket. And number 1 in floater field goal percentage. There's always some like drawing the lines, logging on that, but making 52% of their floaters. But I mean, number 1 in offensive effective field goal percentage. I've been a Cavs optimist. I don't necessarily think that's going to continue. They were 14th last year, 10th the year before.
I think maybe where they could possibly be a little more effective there is Evan Mobley just getting better in that area. And again, we saw it down the end here. Just not only is it that he's driving more, I heard this stat elsewhere, I haven't checked it, but I think his drives per game, which is basically you start outside of 20 feet and you finish inside of 10 feet, has gone from 3 last year to 9 this year as of a couple of games ago. And they are, of course, putting the ball in his hands more. Didn't do that quite as much at the end of this Milwaukee game, but the thing that I did like, and again, you go back to 2 years ago when he and Jared Allen just like couldn't score inside against Mitchell Robinson. And now he doesn't give a fuck who's in his way. Like he is just going to go to the basket and try to finish and try to dunk on him. And he had one play where he went right at Brook Lopez and Giannis and almost scored on him. He just happened to like catch Giannis in the face a little bit with an elbow or a hand actually. But there are a lot of plays where he's just coming in trying to dunk on people, and he's not afraid. It looks like he's just gotten a little bit stronger and more aggressive. And so that's just so huge for this offense is when Evan Mobley gets the ball with some space in front of him, what is he going to do? And we haven't really, it's not nearly as much like, oh, well, everyone's like, well, he's got to shoot the 3. He's got to shoot the 3. I'm like, no, actually, I think like number 1 for him is just go to the basket and shoot something other than like a little floater from the dotted line that's going to go in 40% of the time. Yeah. And I think that's been the biggest thing that I've really liked. Like he had a play where he caught the ball on the left wing during the end of the game, drove to the basket, and let me double check who it was that he scored on. I think it was, he goes right at Brook Lopez from the left wing, off the dribble, right hand, right foot, probably like 4-footer over this guy and scores on him. Like that's just not a play that we would have seen him making. I try to avoid that designation because it's such a cliche. Like, oh, he never would have made that play last year. But no, I never would have made that play last year. So, the lineups I thought were pretty interesting down the end. Bucks, of course, went to their starters because they only
don't have anyone
five
else.
good players. Not a huge surprise there. And we'll talk about what Lillard was able to do. He had a pretty interesting. He's had a pretty interesting like last 3 games. And then, but they also had Taurean Prince in the game. So I'm sorry, I misspoke. They have 4 good players. One of them is not playing right now. Right when I started really looking at it closely, Sam Merrill hit a 3 on Prince. They thought the Cavs like waited quite a bit to get Donovan Mitchell back into the game. About 4 minutes left. They've kind of been going in terms of their rotation. I think Kenny Atkinson is kind of taking a page out of Quinn Snyder's book, someone with whom he worked with, actually, I believe. I want to say in Atlanta, they worked together. And so he's pairing up Donovan Mitchell with Evan Mobley, and like they used to pair up Mitchell with like I think it was Derek Favors in Utah, and then they have Garland playing with Jared Allen, and they're really like letting Garland cook on the second unit, running pick and roll with Allen. So I think that's because they're really trying to emphasize Mobley and him working more, and Mitchell I think is sacrificing. They're also trying to get Garland going. So I like that. Let's see here.
Well, I mean, one thing I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you, because
Yeah.
I think I had this on, but I wasn't taking notes. Was like the use of Isaac Okoro around the late parts of this game was a little bit weird.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, David says that thoughts on Okoro's diminished role, and I think overall it makes sense. But because Dame was going crazy, Okoro is still one of the best at guarding and pick and roll. One of the things that he's really good at is directing the ball where it needs to go. And so I think he was decent on Dame. I liked what the Bucks largely did, though, to get him open. Like they start off, Doc Rivers, loves to run the same play over and over again. So he's starting with a staggered double with Giannis. Or I shouldn't say staggered double because it's usually off the ball, but a double drag, I guess, would be more accurate, with Dame and Giannis and Brook Lopez. It was kind of interesting because you had Okoro and the 2 Cleveland bigs guarding those guys, but they were still able to create some miscommunication. They also just were happy to get Evan Mobley or Jared Allen guarding Dame, and they felt like Dame could beat that, and he largely did because he was just white hot. I think he had 10 points in the last 5 minutes of the game. But it's interesting because you're keeping the 2 guys you would in theory be going after out of the action in Garland and Mitchell.
Right.
And then they changed up a little. They went after Mitchell, I think, one time at the end. But I think it was good, though, because you forced the 2 bigs to get out away from the basket. And then if you could get past them, then there wasn't going to be much resistance afterwards. Or those 3, like, you're not going to get great communication on some of those plays. Like the Cavs tried a couple of different ways they wanted to defend it. They tried to keep it on the side. That didn't really work. Then they tried to pre-switch it, but Dame was getting the matchup he wanted and scoring. But yeah, I mean, I think Okoro hit a 3 when Dame tried to came off the strong side corner and tried to take a charge. So he actually, he burned them the one time that they weren't guarding him. The Bucks also just they're just not very connected or good. They're just they're not gonna just not guard him the way you probably need to. And even if it is, it's gonna be a guy who can't really do much. They're just gonna try to hide Damian Lillard. I mean, that's maybe the one thing is they gave you somewhere to hide him. But I think they felt like Dean Wade just wasn't going to do it. Obviously, Niang wasn't going to do it. So it had to be Okoro in this matchup. But I think other than when you have an opposing guard just going crazy, they are not going to try to play Okoro very much, which I think is right. I think that's fine. They are a deep team. They have a lot of, especially when they get Max Strus back. So, yeah, use him when you need him. Otherwise, try to space the floor a little bit more. And also, I think they realized correctly that they weren't going to struggle to score against the Milwaukee Bucks, even if you had Okoro and the 2 bigs on the floor at the same time.
I think there's something telling about the Bucks I mean, we're dealing only with 6 games. That their 2 best performances were both losses, but they were losses to good teams that they were competitive in.
Yeah,
The
and they led 30-14 in this game too.
Sure.
And like, Dame looked pretty good. So I like, there's, like we talked about the other day, like they have a pretty low floor on a given night, but they also have a high ceiling because they still have great players who can go off.
I'll do the Bucks stats before I forget. For the season, they are a disappointing 1-5, and not only that, negative 9.7 net rating is 4th from the bottom in the league. They are 21st on offense and 28th on defense, and you can see the skepticism in BPI, which has the Bucks win under 500, 40 wins, and the 6th seed.
Yeah, the Milwaukee Bucks are not looking good right now. I mean, 28th in defensive rating. I mean, that is well below Adrian Griffin levels. Their transition defense is at Adrian Griffin levels right now. And I'm just not sure what their way out of this is on the defensive end, in particular, because, I've been kind of, ringing a small little bell 2 years ago, and now last year's a little bit bigger bell, and now it might be like the Liberty Bell that Giannis Antetokounmpo just is not any kind of a defensive force anymore. It was very stark at the end of this game, I thought, with guys just going right at him multiple times when he was in position to challenge a Jared Allen or an Evan Mobley, and he just didn't jump. Like Jared Allen gets released off a quick little slip to the basket. Like Giannis is standing like right there at the charge circle, and he just never moves. And Jared Allen just lays it in. Like Giannis doesn't even get off the ground. Okay, maybe he felt Evan Mobley's presence behind him. Like Mobley felt absolutely zero fear going right at Giannis. And we haven't even really seen him try to switch on the perimeter because they just, obviously, they need him more as a rim protector. But Brook Lopez, his numbers are still pretty good in terms of rim protection. I want to see what they are with Giannis, but also like him holding up the defense, playing next to Bobby Portis. Like, I don't know if he can really do that anymore as well. And
on that front, the Bucks have a 121 defensive rating when Brook Lopez is off the floor. That's really bad, but it's only a 190.
That's the Giannis at center. Like they never take both those guys off the floor. I mean, God forbid one of them gets injured, then they're really going to be. Because that's like, I would actually say, yeah, okay, Middleton is out, but like you still haven't had any of their 3 most important players miss a game yet.
No,
that's going to happen.
So that 121 is really bad, but it's only a 119 when Lopez is on the floor, and that's another big concern. But I think you're right that the individual rim protection numbers have been there. The opponents are getting.
Now they're 21st on offense. I think that's going to get better. Like,
yes,
the Dame is still a problem. Like the Cleveland Cavaliers had to do a lot of stuff defensively that they didn't want to do to try to deal with him, and like I don't think he can be consistent every night. Like he had a 4-point game right before that, but I think he still inspires enough terror. I thought it was interesting that they just didn't really go to Giannis at all. The only time they ran something through Giannis was when he got a defensive rebound and brought it up, and they basically like, all right, well, he's got the ball, we got to run something for him. So he was kind of underemphasized. I wouldn't say underemphasized, he was just less emphasized because Dame had it going. But that was, and that's also with the Giannis free throw stuff. If Dame has it going, you probably would rather give it to him at the end of the game. But yeah, I mean, it's not time to panic yet, or more accurately, we haven't done the Time to Panic podcast yet. John and I will probably do that one this week. Bucks might be featured. Okay, where are we going next here?
We're going to another team that might end up being a part of that conversation. That's the Indiana Pacers. Do you want to give their stats?
Yes. Hopefully we don't have to give Tyrese Halliburton stats, but they are 2-4.
I have them.
All right. 2-4, as you mentioned, and is really kind of depressing for them. They have as many torn center Achilles as they do wins at the moment. They did get that win against Boston, in which they almost totally blew the lead. They had a lot of their games are pretty crazy, but negative 5.1 net rating, 17th on offense, 22nd on defense. They project for the 9 seed at 36 and 46. I think that's actually tied with another team we talked about before. I can't remember. But yeah, 36% chance of the playoffs per BPI. And yeah, I mean, that loss to the Pelicans is pretty miserable.
And especially when you have the greater context. So the really shorthanded Pelicans have played, this is without CJ, without Herb, and they've been without Trey Murphy the whole year. They played the Warriors and got whooped. They played the Hawks at home and got whooped. And then they played the Pacers and beat the Pacers. And so that's not exactly the most positive sign for Indiana that you are the team that this Pelican squad can still beat. And it is fair context that Aaron Nesmith left that game with a sprained ankle in the second quarter. And then Miles Turner did play, but then Isaiah Jackson, this is when he suffered what became what we now know is to be an Achilles injury. And so there is a lingering question about how this front office and Rick Carlisle are going to handle this. Maybe they're going to bring in somebody else. Maybe they'll entrust Enrique Freeman, one of the rookies that they have this year, who intrigued in summer league. He's extremely active. We'll see whether he can be successful. We haven't really gotten an answer to that. They could also.
I mean, just a quick. I hope they'll go with Toppin and Siakam together. Although then that leaves them kind of light on the wing too, and they also they don't want to play Siakam.
Well, maybe it gives them a little bit. They'll have to manage it more, but maybe you can find ways to incorporate Ben Shepherd a little bit differently. But he's already playing in the second units. You just have to restructure.
I mean, they don't have. I mean, I guess Jarris Walker is just gonna have to play. I mean, you can't play Jarris Walker and Toppin together. The fact that they gave Obi Toppin above the mid level when he apparently can't play any position other than the 4. And does that very poorly. That's not great.
And all of this also combines with even with the mostly getting backup center play, the Pacers have been the worst defensive rebounding team in the league. Caitlin Cooper's talked about this on her side as well. Opponents are grabbing about 35% of their misses, and that compares, the median right now is about 29%. Opponent offensive rebound rate. So that's really, really bad.
Wow. So every one of their opponents is the 24-25 Charlotte Hornets. That's devastating on the offensive glass.
And so there are kind of two other threads that I want to talk about a little bit with the Pacers. And I want to actually start with the defense, because a big question that we kind of expected with them, even with some of the stuff that's been surprising with Haliburton, is whether the defense would be good enough to let the offense carry them. You could say, okay, last year they were 24th, they're 22nd so far. That's good. It's better than they were. And that's not, we wish they were better. However, the major concern is that the Pacers are worse at forcing turnovers and defensive rebounding right so far this year. So what is going better for them is opponent effective field goal percentage. And they have been the 5th luckiest defense so far in the league in terms of opponent 3-point percentage. So that means that because they're giving up 37% of opponent shots or threes, the opponent's missing those threes more than you would expect makes a much bigger difference. And so and this is true, when I've been watching them too. It's I think their defense is actually still bad and just getting a little bit lucky. And that is a gargantuan.
And they're lucky to be 22nd is what you're telling me?
I think so. I think they've played worse than that, especially when you consider the rebounding, which is, of course, a part of defense, not offensive rebounding, as Doc Rivers used to say with DeAndre Jordan.
But let me tell you the other thing too that I'm very concerned about with them. They are 24th in the NBA in 3-point attempt rate on offense. And that's even with Haliburton taking as many as he was taking before. He's not making any of them, as we'll get to, but yeah, that is very concerning to me, because that's what their fast break stuff. I mean, that hasn't been nearly as devastating either. Some of the pace metrics are quite down for them. I don't know. Should we say the miserable Haliburton stats so far?
But yeah, we could go through it a little bit briefly. So these are all the Halliburton on splits last year, this year. Last year, 123.5 offensive rating with him on. This year, 108.9. Huge margin. And they're 6 point worse in first shot half court offensive rating, 6 points per 100 possessions. And also their transition frequency, which is what you're alluding to. 16.2 with Halliburton on the floor last year, cleaning the glass, 13.6 this year. So that's a real drop. And transition frequency is, defense does factor in. But remember, they're 22nd this year. They were 24th last year. And so big drop-offs with Halliburton on the floor. And some of that is basic. He's taking the same 8.7 threes per 40 minutes that he did, or per 36 minutes that he did last year. But instead of making 36% of them, he's making 24%. And also Halliburton, big drop-offs relative to his full season last year in 2-point attempt rate, dropped by 2 per 36. Free throw attempt rate, about half a free throw per 36. And then part of this is opponents or teammates making shots versus not. 12.2 assists per 36, down to 7.7 so far this year.
Yeah, he's just been, not even close to an all-star level. And yeah, and again, that's his full season numbers last year, right? Like the first half of the year, he was, those numbers were all much higher than the ones that you even said. Yeah, and to be, all right, fine, he's shooting poorly from three. Well, at some point, getting up this number of threes and this sort of crazy volume, like he still is not taking as many like kind of weird ones. And he's got a Pascal Siakam now. Like there are other guys on this team. When I say weird ones, that was a terrible description, but like ones where he just like kind of backs up to the 3-point line and then just like turns around and jacks it up. Like he's not playing that kind of free flowing style as much because you have other more established mouths to feed now. It's not, the whole plane isn't built out of him. But at some point, if you're going to keep shooting 24% or like the under 30% that he shot the second half of last year, you're just going to have to stop shooting as many threes. And then that's going to hurt things too, because as you noted, his volume on twos is way down, and he's only shooting 47% on twos. He was 60% last year. And that's like, he used to be, if he got in the lane on the pick and roll and you let him get that floater off, like that was just going to be money. And so, yeah, he really, God, I hope so much that we don't have to keep having these conversations. Although the fear is that maybe the reason we stop having them is that this is the new normal and we just accept that. And I really hope we don't reach that point. I hope that we can at least like still hold on to some glimmers of that player that we saw last year returning.
We hope that. I think the league hopes that. But it's getting more faint, to be sure. And Indiana's going to have some opportunities. They play the Magic without Paolo twice in the next week or so. And that, by the way, that team got, never mind. We'll talk about them later. I don't need to talk about the Magic. But yeah, it's definitely a very real concern. Let's get to the Miami Heat. Of course, a team that has history with the Pacers, 3-2 on the season. Slightly below water net rating, -1, but that is 14th in the league right now. It's just kind of how things go in the beginning part of the year. 19th on offense, 13th on defense. And BPI projects them to finish with 45 wins, which would be the 4 seed in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah, they took care of Washington in Mexico City, 118-98. It didn't even occur to me until I watched the game that the reason Miami was playing there is because Jaime Jaquez Jr. is Mexican. And apparently, according to the broadcast, is a big deal there. I never know how much stock to put in it that like some player is a big deal in a certain country. Yeah, Rui Hachimura, when I was in Japan, I saw like a few Rui posters. So that's that. The Japanese, I usually trust it when people say that a certain guy is big there. I'm not sure how big Jaime Jaquez Jr. is in Mexico, but he didn't do a ton in this one. They went to him on the second unit more as a source of offense to get to the basket without Jimmy and without Bam. And so those units have typically been a problem for Miami. They weren't necessarily in this game. Their starting group is the one that we look forward to. Hero, Rozier, Jovic, Butler, Adebayo, Haywood Highsmith. Interestingly, only played 2 minutes in this game. there wasn't necessarily a amazing perimeter player on the Wizards who needed stopping, although we'll talk more about them in a moment, because I did think their start to the season has been quite encouraging. Even though they did win 2 games against the Hawks too. Mm-hmm. So the big thing that stuck out to me is Miami is just really trying to ramp up the pressure. I thought that the Wizards did well to only turn it over 11 times, so this wasn't that close at the end, but Miami is basically trying to deny just about every pass that they can on the perimeter and really force teams to go backdoor. And didn't help much that the Wizards shot 7 of 35 from 3. Like, one way that you can beat that is you go backdoor or you drive past your man, and because they're denying the perimeter, there either isn't that much help or they have to crash in, and now you can set up a 3. Well, the Wizards didn't make any of those in this game. Kispert was 0 for 6 leading the charge there. But I did think it was an interesting strategy that they're going to really try to ramp up the pressure even more in somewhat different fashion than what they've done in the past, where it used to be kind of more like they're the ultimate like boxes and elbows team, where they're even bringing guys way up out of the corner, and then you have to close out on a diagonal back to the corner. They sort of would try to build this wall at the 3-point line, either in man or in zone, and force you to execute to get past that. And this is a little bit different because guys are like even further out on the floor. So it's not even necessarily an overhelping scheme. It's like, we're just going to literally not let you change sides of the floor and ramp up the pressure so far.
Well, and Nate, one stat to buttress your argument here is that the Miami Heat, we usually talk about time to shot offensively, but it can be a useful metric defensively too. The Heat have the 4th slowest opponent time to shot after made basket this year.
Yeah, that's interesting, because sometimes you might think, oh, you give up a backdoor and it'll happen faster. But also, if the opponent can't run their offense, then they're going to be stuck on one side of the floor. They end up isolating. So be interesting to see how well this comes out in the wash. But it's also just a good way, for example, to just not allow an opponent to really isolate on Tyler Hero or some of your more flammable defenders like an Alec Burks, who shot it well in this game. They did get Josh Richardson back. He looked pretty rusty, unsurprisingly. It was his season debut. Jordan Poole, who we'll talk about more on the Wizards, like, he went right at Hero a few times and was able to get pretty good shots going at him one-on-one. The other thing I'll say, Bam Adebayo was just an absolute beast in this game. First, he hits his first 3 threes of the season. He'd only taken 8 up until that point, so 2 a game. So, the thought that he was going to totally revolutionize his game hadn't happened so far this year. And the ones that he took in this game were all kind of wide open ones where, let's say he throws the ball to the wing and someone drives, they throw it back out to him, he's not being guarded, or maybe he hands off or gives a back door, and then the help comes off of him, and then they throw it out to him at the top. He ended up 12 out of 24, had some more struggles late, but he was plus 25, 32 points, 5 offensive rebounds, and he really just beasted Alex Sarr a few times. Though Sarr got him a couple of times too. He did have 4 block shots in this one, but he did just knock Sarr out of the way. First, it was for getting like pretty good looks at hooks and turnarounds, and then he had 2 plays where he actually just like shouldered him out of the way off the dribble and dunked it. It was kind of going back to like what he was doing against the Celtics in the bubble, attacking off the dribble. So I like Bam just seems to play a little bit more physically off the dribble every year. He really increased his free throw attempt rate last year. Thought that was pretty good.
Oh, Nate, one question I had was, did you see the altitude affecting the players too much?
Desperately, yes. They were, I would say, yeah, Jordan Poole had points where he was totally exhausted. He's not a guy I think of as not being in great shape. Probably saw it a little more from the Wizards than the Heat, but it was definitely something that,
because that's been an underappreciated storyline if Mexico City ever got a team, is the massive elevation there.
Yeah, so yeah, it's 7,000 feet there, and it's not like you can acclimatize that much over a day if you're just coming in. In a playoff series, you probably could acclimatize by like the second game you were playing in the city. So yeah, and that's of course almost 2,000 feet higher than Denver is, And basically Denver and Salt Lake are the only two other places that have any sort of meaningful altitude adjustment. Let's see if I have anything else on the Heat. And not a ton, really. I think Pell Larson is actually played 14 minutes in this one, so he's ahead of, and he's playing some guard too. Duncan Robinson was available due to personal reasons. Kevin Love is going to be back for them in their next game. He hasn't played yet due to personal reasons. That will be useful because I honestly don't even think Thomas Bryant is any better than Kevin Love on defense, and certainly the ability to shoot the three the way Kevin Love can is better than what.
There aren't many Wizards left from the Thomas Bryant Wizards teams, but does this count as a defensive revenge game because they just knew that he couldn't defend anyone?
That's an interesting question. Is there any Wizard who played with Thomas Bryant? Maybe Kispert? Kispert is the longest tenured Wizard, right?
I believe he is.
Yeah. Or is it Johnny Davis?
In my mind, it's Johnny Davis. I believe it's actually Corey.
Johnny Davis actually had 9 points in 18 minutes and was 4 or 5. Didn't take a three, but he had a couple of hard cuts to the basket or drives. It didn't look like totally hopeless for him in this one, at least. Let's turn to the Wiz, though. You want to give us their stats, please?
Absolutely. The Wizards are 2-3 on the season, but they are 29th in net rating, negative 12.3, ahead of only the team that has not yet won this year, and that is the Utah Jazz. The Wizards are 23rd on offense, dead last on defense, and BPI projects them to finish last in the East, 23 wins.
Yeah, so that said, I think this has been a pretty encouraging start to the season for the Wiz. Jordan Poole cooled off a little bit, but was actually shooting 50% from three coming in. And he had 4 turnovers, but like I said, they didn't have that many as a team. And he's looked like a real basketball player. And he took some strides in the Keefe era last year as well. Once they started playing him more as essentially the point guard. He now is starting next to Bub Carrington, he was probably the one young Wiz who didn't play particularly well in this game. More just to kind of not really doing that much rather than anything actively terrible. But Poole looks like a real basketball player. He doesn't look like a joke, the most damaging player in the NBA. Hit a couple of pretty deep threes, and this one was effective, attacking smaller players who couldn't guard him, getting to the bucket. He even had 2 steals and 2 blocks, and he actually is averaging 3 steals a game in the early going. So there are a couple times where they attacked him and he actually stripped him. He looked like, at least in this game, the stats weren't great, 8-18. But in this game, he looked like, the guy that we saw in 2022. And even parts of the 2023 regular season before his miserable playoffs. And not the guy who's just a stain on the game of basketball that we saw for the first half of last year. But that's of less import for Washington. But at least in terms of their watchability, it's important. I thought I'm going to make another prediction here, and I wish I had done it just to start the season. I don't know why I picked Reed Shepherd. I should have picked Sarr as my rookie of the year. I'm going to amend that now because he's just going to get the playing time and he's going to do some stuff. He had 4 block shots in this game, 17 points, and he's just sanding off a few of the rough edges. Certainly the limitations that we noted are there. Tell me what you've thought of Sarr in the time that you've seen him so far this year.
I think that his ability to kind of go get balls defensively, for blocks, has been good. Some of his recognition, it's going to take some time. I think that, but relative to some of the other kind of project-y bigs, I think he's completely fine in that respect. And then the offensive game is raw. It's very raw. I think that shouldn't be a big surprise to us, but it's been better than it was in Summer League, which is not a high bar, but an important bar.
Yeah, and he hasn't, been cowed by that Summer League experience in terms of his offensive aggressiveness. I think he's shooting the three pretty aggressively, and he certainly is able to bust out in transition. The thing that I liked the most in this game relative to where he's been in the past was actually attacking the basket off the dribble. He was able to finish some with touch. Like I really was concerned about his ability to finish on non-dunks, and it wasn't necessarily using his body to carve out space right at the rim, but he's able to like do some euros or drives and actually like finish with some touch. That was encouraging.
Oh, I
He
want to
definitely
give.
was shooting with
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was on this star front. I want to give Keith a lot of credit, the coach of the Wizards, for Sarr getting in foul trouble in the beginning, keeping him in. And you want to guess how many fouls Alex Sarr ended this game with?
the same number that he got in the beginning too, although maybe he could have fouled Bam a little bit
Sure.
more. I mean, like he's just not strong enough to deal with Bam, like we talked about, where you just like it. Even someone like Marvin Bagley, who came in for 4 minutes in this game, guarding Bam, just looked so much. And like Marvin Bagley isn't known as like, you know, some jack dude, but like he just has developed a man's strength over the course of 6 years in the NBA. And so sorry, he's going to get there to where I think he'll never be like, you know, a guy who's like squatting 600 pounds or something like that, but he'll get to the point where he's able to like fight a little harder. I mean, the fatigue thing also I think was a problem, but like, you know, he did block Bam a couple of times, and he also, I think he just plays a pretty high effort level. There's one play where I think it was Hero drove to the basket, Sarr forced him to pass it back out all the way to the left wing, and then Sarr actually managed to get out there and run Terry Rozier off the line. Now, Rozier just kind of shot faked him, moved to the side, and made the shot. But that effort level and the amount of ground to cover to stop a guy from shooting a layup and actually run the shooter off the line from the pass that dude just threw, and not even just to the corner either. This is all the way out to the top. It was impressive. So I think the off the dribble stuff is good. Like I think his shooting is going to be passable. Like he's definitely taken them. Like the space that he was providing, I think, was pretty useful. And then we'll do a full breakdown on Bilal Coulibaly, but man, has been very, very exciting. His start to the season.
19.4 points per game, making his threes so far. Not taking a ton, but making them. But Coulibaly, 73% true shooting on 18.4 usage in the early going.
And he just another guy who's gotten a little bit stronger. He's still very young though. Has he even turned 20 yet? If he just did, I think, if anything. He was a super young rookie.
He did in July.
Okay. So, and of course he's got the 7'2" wingspan, but he's starting to fill out, and he's starting to look like, if not quite an Andre Iguodala level of athlete, like you were seeing some of that in his game with his ability to handle the ball. He always has been a pretty decent ball handler for his athleticism. And so now he's actually starting to be able to get to spaces where he wants to go on the floor, shouldering guys out of the way, aggressively driving to the basket, using his length to finish. He's been shooting okay from the outside. I'm not sure that that's there yet. That kind of Dante Exum like wide stance shot is not going to be a high volume, but like his form, at least up top, looks okay. You know, he's not like getting anything involved in the shot motion that shouldn't be there or anything like that. Defensively, like there still are times when, you know, the likes of a Jimmy Butler is going to go through him. I didn't see, like, he had 0 steals and 0 blocks in this game. Like, he hasn't necessarily been a huge playmaker. Some of the rim protection stuff he had, like chasing guys down last year, was really intriguing. I didn't see any of that in this game at all. And he was -22 despite being 8 of 12 from the field and having 22 points. That usually means your defense probably wasn't too good. And also another guy who really struggled was Keyshawn George with 0 for 6 from the field or from 3-point range. But I actually think he's going to be a player. I think he's got enough athleticism to survive defensively. Maybe not as like a huge plus, but he's got decent size and length. Like I don't think he's going to be a huge liability there. And so like he's got some ability to get to the basket, some ball skills, and as long as he shoots it passably, like he's going to at least be a rotation player. So I think they had themselves a pretty good draft, even if Bub didn't do that much in this game.
Yeah, I've been a fan of the Wizards draft. I continue to be, at least in the loose form. I wonder with George, like what his ideal role is. Like I talked about this in my individual scout that I did for Dunc'd On Prime subscribers can hear it. Where I thought he played too much on ball in college, but there's a place for him. I think that he can have a successful NBA career.
Sorry, a couple other notes that I had
Of course.
just to empty out the notebook. They did play Sarr a little bit at the 4 at the end of the half next to Valanciunas. Valanciunas has been more helpful in other games. He was awful in this one. He was just kind of taking like floaters or mid-rangers the moment it touched his hands. That wasn't too awesome. But Sarr is mostly played at the 5. They're running a lot of kind of quick handoff type of stuff with guys that they think can dribble, like either Coulibaly or Sarr are kind of the QB trying to decide whether to like hand off or fake the handoff and keep it and try to drive to the basket. Like Coulibaly had a couple of nice drives there, so did Sarr. I think that takes pretty decent advantage of, because Coulibaly really offensively is playing the 4. And so the you can kind of run stuff through the elbows with both of those guys. And then for Miami, Jimmy Butler, 6 of 13, 6 of 8. Like, it weirdly had 6 offensive rebounds, but it wasn't a particularly encouraging game for him from an athletic standpoint. But this is also a game where they didn't need Jimmy Butler to play particularly well. And yeah, all right, that's all I got here. Who's next? Knicks, or should we go elsewhere?
Let's do the Magic. We've done a lot that you did more work on, and Orlando, it's not exactly the most. Let's do their stats first, and then I'll kind of set the table.
Yeah, only 3-4, and things started so nicely for this team. They blew out the Heat on opening night, and haven't really been that great since then. Of course, Paolo is out now. They blew that lead to the Bulls, which wasn't amazing. So yeah, only 3-4, negative 2.6 net rating, 26th on offense and 8th on defense. And BPI says 40-42, but the 6th seed? They think the 6th seed? Is that right? I'm gonna look that up. Maybe we have a transcription error and where they actually think this is going to be, but 40-42, but thinks they have a 70% chance of the playoffs. Maybe BPI is really low on the East. So what do we have here for?
Well, the first thing that I wanted to look at is how is Jamal Mosley going to run this rotation with Paolo Banchero out? And unfortunately, because they've had other injuries, we don't have a clear picture here. But the first go at it, Anthony Black was the new starter. So then a lot of the other guys move up a position. Franz Wagner goes to the 4. KCP is probably the 3, and then Suggs and Black are the guards. But things got a little murkier because Wendell Carter was out for that game against the Cavs, which they lost pretty handily. And then
he came back in this Dallas game and had to leave again, and it's a plantar fascia injury for him. So I could see him missing some time now.
Yeah, and so
once he tries to come, you miss a day, you try to come back, and then you can't complete that game. That usually foreshadows some missed time.
Yeah, and so for clarity with Carter, he'd been previously dealing with right knee tendonitis. Then this is a left plantar fascia strain.
Oh, okay.
So how that stuff fits together is maybe that's a little bit more positive, but maybe it's not. That presumably Mo Wagner is going to be the starter in Carter Jr.'s stead, however long he's out. We don't know that at this point. But one of the big changes from the Cleveland game to the Dallas game is that the other starter beyond the whole center stuff was Tristan da Silva, rookie out of Colorado, rather than Anthony Black. And so da Silva
maybe they wanted more size against the Mavs.
Presumably
didn't seem to help them. They scored 40 points they were down 65-40 at halftime.
And I mean, they lost 108-85, so it didn't get much better for them. Da Silva, 31 minutes, 7 points on 7 field goal attempts for them. And I mean, Franz Wagner was well. So we're just going to have to, it's going to be hard sledding for the Magic, but hopefully it can be better for them than these first 2 games where they got absolutely run by the Mavs and they lost. As I recall, was a pretty comfortable win for Cleveland. It ended up being a little bit closer at the end, but as I recall it, and I could get that wrong, and I apologize. Then, so in terms of where it goes from here, maybe that 5th starter continues to move around a little bit, and potentially maybe Carter Jr.'s lack of availability, if that ends up being the case, maybe that pushes you to have a little bit more spacing out there. It remains to be seen, but something that I thought was a potential silver lining of Banchero's injury was that it gives them opportunities to evaluate some different player combinations, and it's going to take more time. But there are some possibilities there. Jet Howard can potentially be in the mix. Cole Anthony could potentially be in the mix. And so you can work some of those things differently, get to see if there could be some chemistry somewhere else. Another Magic storyline that we can still keep an eye on, even with Paolo Banchero out, is Jalen Suggs shooting. He had a really hot start to the year, and so was the people were getting excited, and still can be. So last year, Suggs 6.8 threes per 36, made 40% of them, and that was a huge year-to-year shooting improvement. That attempt rate is still really high. It was over 10 at one point this year. It's now down to 9.4, which is still really, really high. But he was over 40% on threes. That's now, after the Mavs game, down to 36.5%. Still respectable on that volume. But the question that remains is just, what level of shooter is Jalen Suggs? And I mean, I will say 36.5 at this kind of volume, you're completely fine with that. But the best games were early in the season. We don't know what the true number is going to be. And whether that's 36.5, 35, 39 makes a massive difference in terms of Suggs' offensive role. Even if I've underappreciated some of his on-ball stylings, the stats have been better on it than I remembered.
Yeah, he did actually have 9 2-point field goals in that game against the Cavs, which was a relative blowout. Cleveland led by double digits for like the last 3 quarters of the game, although it never really got like totally out of hand. Yeah, and De Silva did have 17 points in that one. That's probably why he got elevated to the starting lineup. And yeah, it'll be a chance for Suggs to improve his playmaking chops a little bit. He hasn't really been an adequate offensive point guard. He's really been more of a shooting guard. And the playmaking of Franz and Paolo has allowed him to settle into that role a little bit more. So now it'll be interesting to see whether he can do more of that. But if they're missing Wendell Carter, like that's going to certainly be an issue. And Goga Bitadze is out for them also. He's got this left foot issue.
Yeah, a tendon
I'm not
issue.
sure. Yeah, so like he was the guy who kept them afloat defensively last year. Jonathan Isaac is going to play 15 minutes. And he's really struggled offensively to start the year as well. And this is a really deep team. They have a lot of interesting players, but I mean, they're going to be missing 2 starters. And KCP was a guy who was brought in to be a complement to those stars. Like he's not like he can ramp up his volume. They still are barely playing Cole Anthony, which is interesting to me that they are really like, they're just so down on him at this point. But they're gonna, I mean, maybe it'll be Jet Howard doing more as a shooter. Like they're gonna have to find some kind of offense because Paolo was so good, even if it wasn't like the absolute highest efficiency in past years, and it was starting off very efficient this year at just creating a shot for them. And also he was easily their best passer on the probably on their whole team, I would say. And it's not even really close. So they're going to be in trouble. I mean, I don't think they can maintain like over 500 with him out, and particularly not if Carter is also going to be out. Like his spacing would have been really important. Like Mo Wagner tried to take more threes in this Dallas game. Like that's just has never been his game. They don't want to start him because he's just too flammable on defense. Like he needs to have like. Now the Wagner brothers as your defensive front court, your 4 and your 5, like that's going to get lit up in terms of your rim production. So they all of a sudden have a ton of flaws right now.
They have a big, between now and the next 15 and 60, they have a big 5-game homestand again with some winnable games, especially if the Pels are shorthanded still a week from now. Pels, Wizards, Hornets, Pacers, and Sixers. Hopefully the Sixers are healthy by that point. But I mean, we'll get a much better sense of kind of what this non-Banchero Magic team is capable of. But they might dig themselves a hole, not a hole too deep for them to avoid making the playoffs, but to be in a position to really make some noise. And
that's good news for some of these teams too. Now Cleveland obviously has been really solid, but some of these teams like a Philly or a Milwaukee who are struggling, at least you're not going to have Orlando or Indiana is looking pretty bad too right now. So I think Orlando can put pressure on those teams in the regular season once they get their guys back, but it's going to be some time for that now. So yeah, I mean, I think, and I did double check, by the way, that BPI number is correct. They are projecting the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference right now to have 40 wins.
Amazing.
And so, but like, yeah, I mean, who's playing well in the East right now, right? I mean, the Celtics, I mean, the Knicks, we'll talk about them in a second. Hopefully Philly get rolling. If they get their guys back, we'll see. Like, I don't think Chicago and Brooklyn are like, what they're doing is sustainable to be, above 500 or something like that. So yeah, we thought this group was so deep in the Eastern Conference, and you've got 4 of those 8 teams really like playing like well below 500 basketball right now, and not an obvious off ramp to that either, except for maybe Philly. Let's talk Knicks though now.
Let's do it. New York 3-2 on the season, 6th in net rating, +7. Definitely good. 2nd on offense and 21st on defense. BPI projects them to win 43 games. So that's clearly a strong seed, the 5th seed in the East, considering the 40 win thing. And a notable stat, we talked a little bit in last week about how the Knicks are giving up an incredibly high, almost 75% on opponent shots at the rim. The Knicks as a team are dead last in opponent effective field goal percentage. They're about 4 percentage points, 6 worse than the median. And part of it is that horrendous rim protection. They're also giving up a league worst, so meaning best for the opponent, 49% on floaters, and opponents are drilling 40% of their threes. You expect that to regress to the mean.
Yeah, and their rim protection, we talked about that, has really been very rough, and Karl-Anthony Towns has struggled in that area as well. I mean, it's just, if you're allowing 75% shooting at the rim, and again, I'm not like, how do they, I mean, maybe Mitchell Robinson coming back, he's never been the greatest in terms of his field goal percentage allowed at the rim, but he does at least force teams to shoot a few more floaters and provide a little more resistance than what they've had so far. Karl-Anthony Towns had a huge breakout against the Miami Heat with 44 points and still only 5 3-point attempts. Don't love that low volume. I mean, he was averaging 6 per 36 last year, playing the 4 more, obviously, in Minnesota. Although, I kind of would think that playing center, you would get more 3-point opportunities because you're being guarded by a center more. That wasn't
at least if your team thinks that way. It makes logical sense.
Yeah. Now, this was a very, very nice performance by Karl against Miami. Did a lot of his damage against Thomas Bryant, who was guarding him. Miami did guard him some, although they went after the zone in the second half, which worked pretty well, as I'll get to. But they guarded him a fair amount with the center. They started off with Jovic on him, and Towns just immediately beasted him in the post. Only 2 or 3 of his buckets, I would say, were like directly at the expense of Bam Adebayo. So certainly I think Bam can guard him reasonably well one-on-one. Although Towns had a couple like nice hook shots across the lane. I would say in terms of Karl's individual offensive game, I've liked that shot has been going in for him pretty well. He was actually, this might have been one of those weird scoring games in terms of like where everything was logged. Sure. But he was 11 of 14 in the upper paint in this game, and but only had 2 shots at the rim. But he was doing most of his damage in the paint, and if it was technically upper paint, a lot of it is pretty much well below the dotted line. He had 3 at the dotted line, and then everything else was pretty much either like a short range hook or a layup off a drive. He was very effective on those as well, working the pick and roll with Brunson, getting a little bit of a runway. Did his threes that he did hit, a couple of them were pick and pops from Brunson, who didn't shoot particularly well, but provided some nice gravity to give him a runway, even if it wasn't specifically an assist. But Karl also just played really hard. Like, he had some huge offensive rebounds late, including a couple over Jimmy Butler, which I'm sure gave him great satisfaction. And yeah, it was not a, I don't know if this is your father's Miami Heat defense, particularly if like someone like Highsmith isn't playing. Like, they just don't, like, the things that are going to bother Karl is guys in help coming where he can't expect it. And, it's not even necessarily about the defender that's guarding him. It's the help defenders who are going to come over and guys are going to get in the passing lanes where he tries to kick out, they'll turn it over. And this game was easy for Karl Towns. And part of that is because there are so many other threats on the floor, and some other Knicks got up a fair number of threes in this game. But I think this was a game for Miami where their defense wasn't very good. Karl had some pretty easy matchups against the likes of Thomas Bryant, but he also made some quicker decisions, which I thought was good, less holding the ball, and was able to finish. So he really broke out in a big way with that 44 points, and we'll see whether that is going to be something that's going to persist. This was the first game where he really caused problems for the defense. And I think it maybe is no surprise that the Miami Heat are not a team that can switch at all. They don't really have even a 3 or a 4 that they want to put on. They didn't want to put Jimmy on him, for example. And so, if Jimmy would have guarded him, maybe it would have been a little bit different. But I think teams that have small guards don't have as much switchability. That's what he's going to be really successful against.
One other piece of Knicks news before we move on. Cameron Payne has a strained left hamstring. He's doubtful for the game Monday against the Rockets. I think he might miss more time. That probably means Tyler Kolek's going to play, but the shorthanded Knicks get even more shorthanded.
All right, let's talk Toronto. We can save Philly for last, since I think we're gonna do Paul George's debut tomorrow. I won't talk about.
Yeah. So I'll start with the Raptors stats. 2-5 on the season. Negative 5.6 net rating is 24th in the NBA, 14th on offense, 27th on defense. Projected to win 33 games, which would be 13th, so out of the play-in. Of course, Scotty Barnes is still out, and he'll be out for a while. Emmanuel Quickley is still dealing with this pelvic contusion. The Raptors did get a nice overtime win over the Kings on Saturday. And one of the things that's going well for the Raptors is that they are leading the league in offensive rebounding, 36.9% of their own misses, and that's about over 7% past the median. So they're really doing well in the offensive class.
Yeah, a surprising 14th in offense, as you mentioned. The defense, not great. They just don't really have any backup bigs. It's a bunch of young guys. Jakob Poeltl is just not what they traded for. It's pretty obvious at this point that he's, at best a kind of mediocre rim protector. But that offensive rebound rate is definitely helping them some, and they are moving the ball more. That's been to the benefit of Grady Dick. He's been a big part of why the offense has been able to be respectable as well, and particularly without Quickley, and of course without Scotty Barnes with that broken face. And so Dick has really gotten going. He's been featured 8.2 3-point attempts per 36, 37% from 3. That's too early to draw conclusions about that because he's taken 51 attempts. So if he had missed one more shot, he would be shooting 35% from 3. So certainly he's a guy who needs to be dealt with out there. I don't know if he's going to be, a true 40% 3-point shooting guy, because his shot is a little flat, although the arc is a little inconsistent. Actually, interestingly, the more time that he gets, the flatter it gets sometimes, like when he has to get it off quickly, which he's sped up his release on a couple of these shots that I watched. So he had 30 against the Lakers over the weekend. So I watched some film from that game, and the other game he had 30 into, I think it was the Hornets game, and he had 22 in his most recent game as well. So he sped up his release a little bit. I think the interesting thing, though, is that their offense has been respectable when he's on the floor. They're awful when he sits, but they're in the high one teens when he's out there. So he provides an element that they are not getting elsewhere. And he really works well with some of the off-ball stuff, moving the ball that Darko Rajakovic wants to run. So the stats are pretty interesting. He's not just shooting jumpers when he's coming off screens. He leads the NBA in shots that Synergy has tracked as coming off screens. He's taken 23 of those, and he's made 13. He can go both directions coming off screens effectively, but most of these plays, he's actually not just shooting a spot-up jumper. This isn't, kind of a Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, ball hits his hands, it's out of it in a second at the 3-point line. It's more, he's reading the defense. That's something that we really liked about him coming out of Kansas, was reading screens, seeing if they're shooting the gap, going backdoor, curling when that's required. Maybe he makes the catch and the guy's just not quite there, so we can put it on the floor. So 15 of those 23 possessions, he actually has put it on the floor before the shot. And so it's not necessarily as a catch and shoot player, but you're able to kind of run more offense for him. And he hasn't finished particularly well right at the rim. He's under 50% directly at the rim, but he's 7-11 on twos outside the paint and 15-25 upper paint. That's going to regress some. Like, he's not going to shoot over 50% from those ranges on the season. Very few can do that. I doubt it'll be him. But he had some nice finishes in the Lakers. He had like a hook shot on the drive over Anthony Davis. He's able to use his body at least a little bit to attack and get to the basket. So I'm very encouraged by what we've seen from him. I think one silver lining from this Raptors start, where they've been competitive but just haven't had the horses, and they're 2-5, is that he's been featured more, and he certainly is not going to pass at all. Like, that's not really the way he's being used. He's going to just make the catch and attack and shoot in some way if he gets the ball. But for a team that's just so under talented, and with RJ Barrett, the only guy who can do anything off the dribble right now, like, he's been a very important piece for them.
And it's also Grady Dick's game will work better to me when they have their full complement of players, when they have Quickly, when they have Scotty Barnes, because he can do he makes good reads. And so if you have more space to work with and you have more eyeballs going other places, that can definitely help him.
So Philly, we'll talk about them briefly. I do think it's at least important to catalog what they've done in this period, because I just have this nagging feeling that perhaps this won't be the last 5 games they play without either Paul George or Joel Embiid this season. You want to give their stats?
Yes. Philly 1-4 on the season. Third to last in net rating, -9.8 per 100 possessions. 28th on offense, 20th on defense. We've talked about how they forced a bunch of turnovers. 46-36 is their BPI projected record. That would still be the 3 seed. And as we mentioned earlier, it looks like Paul George is going to be back Monday against Phoenix. According to George, Derek Bodner had this. His knee is feeling good, but he just needed to build his cardio back up. So he, maybe his knee was feeling good enough where he could have played on Saturday when they lost at home to the Grizzlies, but he did not. And so it looks like he'll be back. By the way, it's a very fun. So because of nobody's playing on Election Day in the US on Tuesday, everyone plays on Monday, and all of the start times are staggered from one another. Every game starts 15 minutes after the last. So we don't know exactly how we're going to do it, but Philly Phoenix is going to be one of the centerpieces in all likelihood for us, as long as it's competitive, because Paul George is playing, hopefully.
Yeah, well, we'll get a good pH rating on that game. All right, it's the end of the show. We've been talking for 2 solid hours. Just to pretend I didn't say that. Yeah, so Joel playing 5-on-5, supposed to be back pretty soon. He had an altercation with this reporter in Philly. What was the guy's name? Marcus. He's a columnist. So I
believe it's Marcus Hayes.
Marcus Hayes, yeah. It certainly isn't Marcus Thompson, I'll tell you that.
No.
And so initial reports were that Embiid had confronted him in the locker room and threw a punch. That no one really has corroborated. That was an initial tweet by Keith Pompey, who I think he actually ended up deleting it. Pretty much everyone has acknowledged that, there was a shove from Embiid, which is still completely unacceptable no matter what the guy wrote. Embiid was upset that for some weird tangential reason that I didn't really understand, Hayes, when questioning Embiid's fitness, and he was just going basically like 1995 columnists, like the guy is lazy and out of shape and the fans deserve their money back, they should get a discount for all the days that he doesn't play. And I will acknowledge certainly that the stars not playing in games is a big problem for the NBA. I don't think it's that Joel is like can play and he's not. It's not a good thing for him to play. He can't make it through an 82 game regular season. I also agree with Hayes that he should get back into shape, but I don't think that like that's sort of a reactionary column is the highest form of our journalistic art here. But obviously, no matter what was said, I mean, I don't think Hayes got to the point of like, oh, he's dishonoring like his dead brother or something, something like truly beyond the pale. It just, I think he said that like he plays for his brother or something. Like I don't know what the implication was there, and it ended up getting deleted in later versions of the column. But and according to Kyle Neubeck's reporting, Hayes even attempted to apologize, and that didn't go over well. And so I guess you can't let something like that get to a physical altercation, particularly when you're, A, an NBA player, and B, you got like, I don't know how old this dude is, but I'm guessing Joel has a little bit of a physical advantage against the guy. Like, it's just like, you can't do that. I mean, when's the last time we heard of something like this with like someone like actually having a physical altercation with a reporter? I mean, this happens like once every 5 years or something like that. And
it's rare.
Yeah. And Joel had this impassioned thing about like, people questioning him and like what he's put on the line for the city and all that. And like, yeah, he's absolutely played hurt, but it could also be the case that like he wasn't in good enough shape, and that's why he got hurt to begin with, or wilted on the end of games or whatever. But he claimed that he didn't take issue with that. He took issue with the family stuff, which again, I don't know how offensive it was. It certainly was superfluous at best. So I'm not really like it. Just you just can't do that. Like there's he probably is going to face a suspension and a fine for this. I don't know how long it'll be, but it really just shows like a mental weakness, and I'm sure it's dragging on him that he can't play, and this discourse around him, and he is. We've seen honestly that even that discourse has like caused him to play when he shouldn't have played, like last year when he hurts the meniscus in the Golden State game, but obviously was like on one leg that whole game. So it's just none of it is good for Philly. Like it doesn't directly relate to the on-court product, but it also certainly doesn't give you more faith that Joel Embiid is going to be able to lead this team where it needs to go.
And speaking of leading this team, one of the other big concerns, even if there are these mitigating circumstances, is that so the Sixers offense has been terrible so far. We've talked about they're 28th overall. They have a 106.7 offensive rating when Tyrese Maxey's on the floor, and a 109.7 when he's sitting. And now when he's sitting, that's playing against backups. You have weaker defensive
and teams
talent.
have been selling out to stop him, and he largely hasn't been able to beat that by making plays for his teammates, even if his teammates are somewhat limited.
So that it's a different challenge for Maxey, and we saw the Sixers have trouble as a team.
It's kind of the same challenge for him as last year, actually.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was getting. Like it's a different role than Maxey ideally has on the best version of the team. I guess.
I agree, but not one that he seems particularly capable of fulfilling. Yes, honestly,
for sure, and it is a problem when you can go through this stretch. And I mean, we don't even know where things are going from here for the 76ers. You brought up the possibility that, they can go more games without PG and without Embiid. Entirely possible, of course. And, so Paul George is presumably coming back, and they have this big 3-game road trip where they play at Phoenix, the Paul George return game, though it's to the Intuit Dome where he's never played. And then they play the Lakers on Friday. And so, I mean, Philly, even if they get Paul George, ostensibly their second best player back, like they could very well lose 2 or 3 of those games. And then we're talking about them as being maybe 2-6. And there's still more than enough time to make things right. But as we brought up with the Bucks, like it raises the stakes. It's very, very complicated.
Yeah, now one thing that is going to change, and particularly if they get PG back too, but even if they'd kept this group together, their offense would be better. Like Maxey's shooting 26% from 3. That would get better. Caleb Martin, concerningly, maybe even of greater concern than the fact he's shooting 15%, is that he's taking only 2.8 per 36. They need him to shoot more than that. Eric Gordon's only taken 5.1 per 36. I mean, that's got to be I mean, the last time he did that, he was probably in New Orleans. That low of a number. Kyle Lowry has 1 2-point field goal on the season. He's shooting 25%, 1 out of 4 from 2 on the season. Interestingly, Maxey is getting to the foul line. That's the one thing he's doing more of than he had in the past. And so is they're actually I think number 2 in free throw rate so far this season. But yeah, it's been pretty ugly, and I don't really know how they're supposed to defend anyone with this group either. And we'll see. I mean, this is not what Paul George really signed up for either, right? He's coming in to be the third guy, and we'll see. I mean, they're going to need him to run a lot of pick and roll. He's probably their best passer, at least who can do anything with the ball. Lowry would be their best passer, but he can't get it inside the arc. So yeah, we'll see. It's going to be. And Joel coming back, I'm pretty sure is going to solve all their problems if he can play at the level that he did before. But it's just, I mean, if they're going to win 25% of their games when George and Embiid are out, they're going to be, they're certainly not winning 50. I guess their benefit is that the rest of the East has been terrible too, most of the way. All right, then. Well, let's see. Do we have any comments worth talking about here? Robert said, I'm surprised beat reporters don't get smacked around more often by players. Well, this is a columnist. It's actually not a surprise to me that it's a columnist. Beat reporters usually play it very close to the vest. They would say something like Joel Embiid has struggled with his shape or something like it is very rare that a beat reporter,
and they have more persistent relationships with everyone involved.
Yeah, and they're traveling with the team, and they need you can't just not be on speaking terms as a beat reporter with one of the team stars. So they're going to keep it close to the vest. They will report what they have to report, but there's an art to it because you're not going to offend people, but you're going to say what you need to say. You're not going to basically call a guy a wuss for not playing and that the fans wasting the fans' money and whatever it was that Hayes said. Let's see here. Anything else we got? Are we doing the strategy stream? Yes, but we are not starting until November 12th. So the first NBA Cup day is actually going to be the strategy stream. So that's and this one from Maz, I got to respond to it. He says, good to hear y'all. This is from 2 hours ago. All assists aren't created equal. He's thinking that Jokic has more of these lesser assists. I completely disagree with that. Jokic actually has way more of those assists because, number one, so many of his is at the rim. Number two, they have very little spacing compared to most great offenses. And it's not like he's just throwing, Rajon Rondo is the ultimate, or Simmons is the ultimate guy who's just dribbling up top. Guy comes off a screen on the wing, you throw it to him and he shoots a jumper, right? That takes some skill to get the ball in the right spot, but you're not creating anything. Jokic, to me, he actually creates more high-value assists than anybody. And I could look this up somewhere, actually, to see, what percentages of his assists are at the rim. But he's right up there. He is not getting a lot of assists just for, bullshit jumpers. He's getting guys on back doors, getting alley-oops, setting up dunks. So I think I completely disagree with that.
I mean, how many players on the Nuggets right now can even make a jumper? Not many.
Yes. All right, then. That'll do it for today. We'll be back with a gamer tomorrow night. Please subscribe to Dunc'd On Prime. Sorry if you didn't sign up with our 35% off code. That is now in the rearview mirror. We're not doing that anymore. At least maybe until a few months from now, we might consider another sale. But we're into the meat of the season now, and hope to see you on Dunc'd On Prime.